The mug was chipped on one side, the coffee inside it lukewarm and slightly bitter, and Marcus Webb held it like it was the only stable thing left in the universe. Outside the observation window, the Voskaran flagship Ember of Judgment was breaking apart in slow motion. Sheets of hull plating peeled away and tumbled into the dark, catching starlight like scattered coins. Alarms screamed through every corridor of that dying ship, 3 kilometers of alien engineering, reduced to a coffin drifting sideways through space. Marcus didn't flinch. He took another sip. Fleet Marshal Thursa Kell stood beside him, on the observation deck of the human science vessel Quiet Harbor, her 4 eyes wide, her breathing ragged through her translator collar. She had commanded soldiers for 30 cycles. She had watched empires burn. She had never once seen anything like this. "You did that," she said. "Not a question." "I asked a question," Marcus said. "Your ship answered wrong. You asked a question." He set the mug down on the railing. "Cream's better on this ship than the last one, by the way. You should tell your logistics people." Behind them, 3 more Voskaran warships were changing course, engines flaring bright as they retreated from a fleet a fraction of their size. The panic wasn't in the wreckage. The panic was in the retreat. 60,000 soldiers had just watched a human in a wrinkled gray sweater destroy their flagship without lifting a weapon, and every captain in that fleet was now asking the same terrified question. What else does he know how to break? But none of this had begun with a coffee mug and a dying ship. 6 days earlier, Marcus Webb was not a soldier. He wasn't a diplomat either, not officially. He was a systems engineer for the Interstellar Compliance Office, a small and mostly ignored department, whose job was to make sure human trade agreements didn't accidentally violate the terms of first contact treaties. It was tedious work. He liked tedious work. Tedious work didn't try to kill you. He was 3 cups of coffee into a Tuesday when Director Amara Osi called him into her office and told him humanity was going to war. "With who?" Marcus asked, still holding his mug. "The Voskaran Dominion," Osi said. "They've annexed the Calder Belt colonies, 11,000 civilians. They're calling it a border correction." Marcus frowned. "That's not a border correction. That's an invasion. I know that. You know that. The Voskarans know that too. They just don't care, because nobody's ever been able to stop them. They've conquered 41 systems in the last 2 centuries. Every single one surrendered before the second battle." She slid a folder across the desk. "We need someone who understands their command architecture, their ships, their networks, their chain of authority. You wrote the interoperability protocols for the last 3 species we made contact with." "I wrote spreadsheets," Marcus said. "I didn't fight anyone." "You're not going to fight anyone," Osi said. "You're going to talk to them." That was the moment nobody in that room understood what they were actually asking for. The Voskarans, it turned out, ran their entire military through something they called the Choir, a vast, interconnected command network linking every ship, every officer, every weapons platform into a single responsive whole. It was elegant. It was fast. It let a fleet commander issue an order and have 60 ships execute it in perfect unison within seconds. It was also, Marcus realized after 4 days of studying intercepted transmission architecture, built on trust, not human trust, not emotional trust, structural trust. The assumption, baked into every layer of the system, that any officer speaking through the choir was speaking with the full authority of their rank, and that rank could never be questioned mid-transmission, because questioning a superior officer during an active engagement was considered a court-martial offense across the entire Dominion. Nobody had ever tried to argue with a Voskaran fleet commander in the middle of a battle. Marcus decided that was exactly what he was going to do. But none of this would matter unless he was actually there. Getting a seat at the negotiation was its own battle. The compliance office had exactly 1 diplomatic vessel available, an aging cutter called the Quiet Harbor, and exactly 1 crew willing to fly it into contested space without a military escort. Fleet Marshal Thursa Kell, herself a defector who'd spent 6 years fighting the Voskarans after they burned her homeworld, agreed to pilot it, mostly because she thought the mission was suicide and wanted to see how it happened. "You understand," she told Marcus on the 3rd day of the flight, "that the Voskarans do not negotiate. They inform. There is a difference." "I've noticed," Marcus said, reviewing his notes for the 9th time. "Their commanders do not accept challenges to their authority. It is not culture, it is architecture. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier is wired to obey rank without hesitation. You cannot argue with that." Marcus looked up. "I'm not going to argue with their rank." "Then what?" I'm going to argue with their system. Kel didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. 3 days later, the Voskaran fleet arrived to receive the human surrender they assumed was coming. Fleet Marshal Doran Vex commanded that fleet. A towering figure with plaited gray skin and a voice that carried across open comms like distant thunder. He had crushed 41 civilizations into submission and expected the 42nd to follow the script. Humans would beg. Humans would offer resources. Humans would sign whatever was placed in front of them, the way every other species had. Instead, a single unarmed cutter approached his flagship, requesting to speak. Not to him, but to his entire fleet, over the open choir frequency. Vex laughed. He allowed it. It would make an entertaining example. Marcus Webb's voice came through every speaker on every Voskaran ship in that fleet, calm and unhurried, the way a man might speak while reading a weather report. Fleet Marshal Vex, before we begin, your choir network runs override authority through rank confirmation only. Correct? No secondary verification? There was a long pause. Something in Vex's tone shifted, just slightly. That is Dominion architecture. It is not your concern. It's about to be everyone's concern, Marcus said. Because right now I'm transmitting on that same frequency. And your system doesn't actually check who is speaking. It just checks the rank code attached to the signal, and I happen to have a rank code. Yours, actually. I copied it 11 seconds ago from your own outgoing transmission. Silence swallowed the channel. The truth stunned the entire fleet. You cannot, Vex started. I already did, Marcus said. Every ship in your fleet is currently receiving conflicting orders from what their systems believe is you. Half your gunners are being told to power down, targeting arrays for a diagnostic check. Half your navigators are being told to hold position for redeployment. I didn't hack anything. I didn't break anything. I just asked your own network a question it was built to always answer without doubt, and it answered. Kel, standing beside him, hadn't moved in over a minute. Across the Voskaran fleet, ships that had trusted their command structure without question, for 2 centuries began grinding to a confused, stuttering halt. Not from sabotage, but from obedience. Perfect, unwavering, structural obedience to a voice the system had no way to verify wasn't real. Everything changed in the next few seconds. Vex's flagship, the Ember of Judgment, attempted an emergency override, a maneuver that required routing full authority back through the central choir relay. The one system flaw Marcus had found on day 1, buried in 400,000 lines of command code. The override itself trusted rank before identity. The relay accepted Marcus's signal instead. The ship didn't explode from a weapon. It came apart because its own automated safety protocols, believing they were following a legitimate command, vented 3 reactor cores simultaneously to avoid an overload that Marcus had convinced the system was imminent. The Voskarans hadn't been attacked. They had, in the most literal sense, obeyed themselves to pieces. That was the moment Kel watched a man in a wrinkled sweater finish his coffee and quietly ask, "Is it always this loud when a fleet panics?" The Council had made a terrible mistake, and they were only beginning to understand how large it was. What happened next spread faster than any battle report in Dominion history. Not because of the destruction. The Voskarans had lost far larger ships before, but because of how. No missiles, no boarding parties, no declared war. A single unarmed human, on an open channel, had proven that the very obedience the Dominion prized above all things was also its deepest vulnerability. Within 6 hours, Fleet Marshal Vex requested a ceasefire. Within 2 days, Dominion Command requested Marcus Webb by name for formal negotiations. Not to punish him, but because for the first time in 2 centuries, someone had shown them a mirror, and they were desperate to understand what they were looking at. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't grandstand. He sat across from Voskaran diplomats in a cold conference room aboard a neutral station, laid out the flaw in their architecture in plain, patient language, and then helped them fix it, on the condition that the Calder Belt colonies were returned, and that the word annexation never appeared in another Dominion transmission again. Thursa Kel asked him afterward, once the treaty was signed and the cameras were gone, why he'd helped them at all after everything they'd done. Marcus thought about it for a moment, turning his empty mug over in his hands. Because breaking things is easy, he said. Building something that doesn't break again, that's the part that actually matters. He didn't ask for a medal. He didn't ask for a statue. 3 weeks later, he was back at his desk at the compliance office, reviewing trade paperwork, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside his terminal. The man who had humbled an empire without firing a single shot, already buried in spreadsheets, already forgotten by the history books that would later struggle to believe he was real. Somewhere in Voskaran space, an entire fleet still flinched at the sound of an unfamiliar voice on an open channel. And Marcus Webb, humming quietly to himself, simply turned the page.